Imagine this. You're trying so hard to just look the other way while the whole world is, literally on fire.
Not our problem.
Exactly. Nope, not our problem. Even as ships are sinking, empires are collapsing. But then, almost overnight, you jump in, you tip the scales, and in the process, you rewrite your own rules.
Completely rewrite them. From who gets to vote to, well, what you can even drink.
It's a massive pivot. And we are, of course, talking about the United States and the Great War.
World War I. But this isn't just about trenches and mustard gas.
No, we're really looking at the American shift. Why did the U.S. wait so long? What was the final push? And how did a war in Europe end up banning beer in Chicago and giving women the vote?
It's a fascinating story, and for this deep dive, we've got a great stack of sources, some textbook histories, sure, but also lecture transcripts that really get into the weeds, and even primary documents like Woodrow Wilson's actual speeches.
Okay, so our mission today is to unpack this. How the U.S. went from this sort of isolationist observer to a global power, and maybe why the peace was even messier than the war itself.
Let's do it.
So let's start at the beginning. 1914. Europe just explodes.
Right. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated. The alliance system kicks in, and suddenly everyone is at war.
And what's the U.S. doing?
Standing very, very still. The official policy was neutrality, and this came straight from President Wilson. He gave a speech in 1914 asking Americans to be, and this is a direct quote, impartial in thought as well as action.
Impartial in thought. That sounds impossible. How can you police what people think?
It sounds totally naive, doesn't it? But if you look at the sources, at the demographics of the country at the time, Wilson wasn't just being, philosophical. He was trying to prevent a civil war.
A civil war? That seems a bit extreme.
Does it? Think about who America was in 1914. You have millions of German Americans with families still in Germany.
Oh, yeah.
You have Irish Americans who frankly hate the British Empire and might be rooting for Germany. Then you have all the people with ties to England and France.
So if the government picks a side,
you risk tearing the country apart. Wilson was terrified that the war would just jump the Atlantic and turn neighbor against neighbor in places like Chicago or New York. So neutrality wasn't cowardice, it was a survival strategy.
That puts a whole new spin on it, but let's be honest, were we actually neutral?
On paper, yes. Economically, not a chance.
It's bugging money.
A lot of money, selling to both sides, at least in theory. But the British had this massive naval blockade on Germany.
Right.
So our trade with Germany just plummeted from about $350 million to almost nothing. Meanwhile, our trade with the Allies quadrupled. We're talking $3 billion.
So our wallet was firmly on the Allied side. Even if our government wasn't, we were basically bankrolling the British war effort.
And that economic pressure is what makes Germany more and more desperate, which leads us to the submarines.
The U-boats. Okay, so this is the moment everyone knows, right?
Yeah.
May 1915, the Lusitania.
Yep. German U-boat sinks a British passenger ship. 1,200 people die. 128 of them are Americans.
That has to be it. That's when we go to war.
You would think so. It's the classic story. But it's not what happened. It was a huge deal, of course. The headlines were screaming, "Remember the Lusitania?" It was a massive propaganda win for the Allies. But did Wilson declare war?
No.
Nope. He held firm. In fact, a year and a half later, when he's running for re-election in 1916, his winning campaign slogan was, "He kept us out of war."
Wow. Okay, so if sinking a passenger ship full of Americans didn't do it, what on earth finally broke that neutrality?
It was a 1-2 punch in early 1917. First, Germany got really desperate. That British blockade was starving them out.
Right.
So they made a huge gamble. They announced they were resuming unrestricted submarine warfare.
Meaning they'd sink any ship, no questions asked.
Any ship, merchant, military, whatever, near Britain. They knew it would probably bring the U.S. in, but they were betting they could win the war before our troops could make a difference.
A massive gamble. What was the second punch?
The second punch was, it sounds like something out of a spy movie. The Zimmermann telegram.
Okay, you have my attention.
British intelligence intercepts this secret coded message from the German foreign minister, Arthur Zimmermann, to the German ambassador in Mexico.
In Mexico. What's the plan?
It was an alliance proposal. Germany basically said, look, if the U.S. declares war on us, you should declare war on them.
And in return?
When we win, we'll help you get your lost territory back.
Wait, What lost territory?
Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona.
You're kidding me. Germany actually thought Mexico, which was in the middle of its own revolution, could just invade and take back the American Southwest.
It sounds insane, right? And the sources are pretty clear that Zimmerman didn't actually expect Mexico to, conquer Texas.
So why send it?
Distraction. Chaos. They didn't need Mexico to win. They just needed Mexico to be a big enough problem to keep the U.S. Army busy on the border. If American soldiers are stuck in Arizona, they're not getting on boats to France.
So it was a strategic play. But the nerve of it.
Oh, the audacity was everything. Once the telegram was published, the whole isolationist argument just collapsed. You can't be neutral when a foreign power is talking about carving up your country.
It's not a distant European problem anymore. It's in your backyard.
Precisely. So in April 1917, Wilson goes to Congress, asks for a declaration of war, and he frames it very idealistically. He says, we have to fight to make the world safe for democracy.
Which brings us to the home front. Because once America's in, it is all in. The sources call this total war.
Right. It's not just about sending soldiers, it's about reorganizing the entire society. And this is where you see those incredible social changes. Let's start with women.
Yes. The farmerettes.
The Women's Land Army. I mean, think about it. Nearly 5 million men eventually serve. Someone had to do their jobs. So you have about 1 million women fled into the workforce.
Doing jobs they were never allowed to do before.
Exactly. Working on railroads and steel mills, and they served overseas too, about 20,000 of them. Most were nurses with the Red Cross, but there were also the Hello Girls.
The who?
The Hello Girls. They were bilingual telephone operators, fluent in French and English, working right behind the front lines connecting military calls.
That's incredible. In all of this service, it has to connect to the right to vote. You can't ask women to build the bombs and then say they can't cast a ballot.
It's a direct line. But it wasn't just a thank you gift, it was leverage. The sources talk a lot about the Silent Sentinels, Alice Paul's group.
They were the ones picketing the White House, right?
During the war, which was hugely controversial. People called them traitors. But their signs were so powerful, they just pointed out the hypocrisy of Wilson fighting for democracy in Europe while denying it to millions of women at home.
And he eventually had to give in.
He did. After the protesters were jailed and went on hunger strikes and the government started force-feeding them, the PR was just terrible. So Wilson flipped. He started calling women's suffrage a vital war measure.
So the war really pushed the 19th Amendment over the finish line.
Absolutely. But it wasn't just women on the move. There was also the Great Migration.
African Americans moving from the South to the North.
That's right, about 350,000 between 1910 and 1920. And the war is the engine for this.
How so?
Well, there's a pull and a push. The pull is jobs. European immigration basically stops because of the war.
So the factories in the North are desperate for workers.
Desperate to build tanks, ships, all of it. And the push, that's escaping Jim Crow. Escaping lynchings, the violence, the total lack of opportunity in the South.
So they find jobs, but do they find a promised land?
They find better wages, for sure. But the racism wasn't just a Southern thing. The sources point to major race riots in northern cities, East St. Louis, Chicago. The tension just followed them north.
Okay, so we've got these massive demographic shifts happening, but there's one more that seems so odd. Prohibition. In the middle of a world war, the U.S. decides to ban alcohol. Why?
It seems random, but it was tied directly to the war. For two big reasons. First, conservation. What's beer made of?
Grain.
Yeah.
Barley, wheat.
Oh, food. The slogan was, food will win the war. Every bushel of barley used for beer was a bushel not used for bread for the troops.
Bread over booze. I get that.
But the second reason was cultural. Xenophobic, really. Who owned most of the big breweries in America?
German Americans. Pabst. Schlitz.
Anheuser-Busch. Exactly. Beer was seen as German. So the temperance movement got to rebrand drinking not just as a sin, but as unpatriotic, as treasonous even.
Wow. Don't drink, you're helping the Kaiser.
And it worked. They were renaming sauerkraut Liberty Cabbage, and banning beer was just the ultimate expression of that anti-German hysteria.
It's incredible how the war becomes the justification for everything. But there's a darker side to this national unity, right? This talk of democracy abroad. Things got pretty repressive at home.
They did. The government created a massive propaganda agency, the Committee on Public Information, but then they passed the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act. They essentially made it a crime to criticize the government, the flag, or the war effort. You could get 20 years in prison.
20 years? For criticizing the government. What happened to the First Amendment?
That's the question that goes all the way to the Supreme Court. in Schenck v. United States.
What was the case?
Charles Schenck was a socialist handing out leaflets, arguing that the draft was unconstitutional and men should resist it. He gets arrested.
But he wasn't violent. It was just a pamphlet.
The court didn't see it that way. This is where Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes comes up with the famous legal standard of clear and present danger.
You can't shout fire in a crowded theater.
Exactly. And what Holmes argued was that during wartime, speech isn't just speech. If your words create a clear and present danger, like, say, disrupting the military draft, then they aren't protected.
So the Constitution can be, what, dimmed during a crisis?
That's a good way to put it. It set a precedent that your civil liberties are not absolute when national security is on the line.
So we have this really strange situation at home, and then the war in Europe ends, November 1918.
The armistice. And Wilson goes to Paris to negotiate the peace. He brings with him this grand vision, his 14 points.
This was the peace without victory idea.
Exactly. He's an idealist. He wants freedom of the seas, open diplomacy, self-determination for nations. And his big idea, the League of Nations.
An international body to prevent future wars.
That was his baby. A place where countries could talk instead of fight. A collective security agreement.
But Britain and France, they weren't on the same page, were they?
Not even close. They had lost millions of people. Their lands were destroyed. They wanted revenge. And the Treaty of Versailles is a treaty of revenge.
The war guilt clause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Germany is forced to take all the blame and pay crippling reparations, about $33 billion. But Wilson does get his League of Nations written into the treaty.
So he comes home with a treaty, thinking he's a hero, but the U.S. Senate has to approve it.
And that's where it all falls apart. The Senate, led by Republican Henry Cabot Lodge, had major problems with it.
What was the issue? The League sounds like a good idea.
It all came down to one word: sovereignty. Specifically, Article X of the League's charter.
What did it say?
It said member nations would have to defend any other member that was attacked. Lodge and his allies feared that would drag the U.S. into endless foreign wars without Congress ever getting to vote on it.
They didn't want a council in Geneva telling American soldiers where to fight.
Exactly. But Wilson was not a compromiser. He and Lodge hated each other personally.
It was about ego, too.
Oh, a huge amount of ego. Wilson saw the League as his moral crusade. He refused to accept any changes or reservations to the treaty. He wouldn't bend.
So the whole thing broke.
Pretty much. Instead of negotiating, he goes on this huge national tour to sell the treaty directly to the American people. The stress is too much, he has a massive stroke, and is basically incapacitated.
And the treaty dies in the Senate.
It does. The United States never signs the Treaty of Versailles, and we never join the League of Nations.
The irony is just staggering. The American president's signature idea. And America is the one major power that refuses to join.
It left the League of Nations toothless from the very beginning, and the U.S. just retreated back into isolationism, turning our back on the world's problems.
Which didn't exactly work out well a couple decades later. So looking back, we went from this country desperate to be impartial in thought to one that had completely remade itself, only to walk away from the table at the very end.
It's an incredible whirlwind. The war forced the U.S. onto the world stage, but it also exposed all our internal anxieties. We wanted to lead, but we were terrified of getting entangled.
It really feels like the messy, complicated birth of modern America.
I think that's exactly what it is.
So I want to leave everyone with one final thought to chew on. Wilson's famous phrase was that America entered the war to make the world safe for democracy. It's a noble idea. But when you look at the reality, at the segregated troops, at activists being jailed for demanding a vote, at socialists imprisoned for handing out a leaflet, it makes you ask a really tough question. Can a nation truly fight for freedom abroad while it's actively restricting it at home? Or does the act of war itself inevitably compromise the very ideals you claim to be fighting for?
That is the fundamental question, isn't it?
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you on the next one.